Many U.S. allies reacted with dismay to Mr. Trump's decision on the deal. They say they will continue to honor the international agreement, but Iranian government has now issued a dire warning that any U.S. action to dismantle the deal would be a strategic mistake. The Iranian president was especially harsh in his criticism of Mr. Trump.
This is an international multilateral deal that has been ratified by the UN Security Council. It is a UN document. Is it possible for a president to unilaterally decertify this important international deal? Apparently, he is not in the know.
Mr. Trump's declaration of Iranian non-compliance conflicts with the view of international inspectors and his own Secretary of State. The thorny issue now goes to the U.S. Congress, which has 60 days, according to Mr. Trump, to pass tougher legislation toward Tehran that satisfies President Trump. That includes taking a harder line on Iran's ballistic missile program, which was not part of the original nuclear deal.
Let me bring in Leslie Vinjamouri now. She's in London. She's a senior lecturer in international relations at SOAS, University of London. Leslie, Mr. Trump wants to get tougher on Iran. We know that. And he wants Congress and the American allies to get tougher on Iran. But he actually hasn't laid out how specifically.
No, that's exactly right. What we're really missing here is any sense of an alternative approach to Iran, any strategic thinking on this. And I think, what's at the heart of this, of course, is this, the internal agreement within the United States, which is completely separate, of course, from the Iranian nuclear deal, which requires President Trump to go to Congress every 90 days. He's had to do this twice already. Now he's come back. And for him, this is terribly humiliating to have to certify, which he's done twice. He didn't do this in the third round, to have to publicly certify Iran's compliance, which of course has been certified internationally multiple times by the IAEA. But for this particular president to have to do that, I think is something that he just simply couldn't bear to do once again. But he hasn't presented an alternative plan. And instead what he's doing is he's in effect giving up his executive power over this particular strategic relationship. And he's turning it back to Congress. And that's a very difficult position. So we have Senators Corker and Tom Cotton, who are now going to be working on a proposed bill. But it puts the U.S. in a very difficult position, and I think one key here might be in this negotiation in Congress to give the president more space. And I've heard of proposals out there to perhaps only require the president to return to Congress every 180 days, which would, of course, deal with this problem of the president's unwillingness to go on the public record and have to actually certify that Iran is indeed complying with the deal, which it is.
Yeah, but the fundamental question is, does Mr. Trump want to actually leave the deal if the deal doesn't become more favorable to the U.S., in his words? And he's got leverage here. We know that he's capable of pulling out of these deals regardless of the consequences. Think of the Paris deal, for instance, the climate accord. So the fact that we know he's capable of pulling out of deals, does that give him leverage, both with respect to Congress for them to get a tougher deal with Iran, and with respect to Iran for them to accept a tougher deal?
Well, it doesn't seem to be giving him a lot of leverage right now over either Iran or perhaps more notably over the European countries that were deeply involved in these negotiations and remain heavily committed to it, have gone on record yesterday as saying they remain committed to it, and as well as the EU. So, but with respect to Congress, of course, he's put Congress in the position where Congress now has to decide, and Congress was never originally very favorable towards this agreement, which is why we're in this position in the first place, because they then enacted this very separate Iranian Review Act, which is really, again, it's an internal domestic issue within the United States, but it's causing very serious international problems now. But it gives Congress some leverage. It gives Trump some leverage over Congress, but it's not clear what the end game is. This isn't something that's been very strategically thought through, because, of course, if the bill that's put forward, if it passes, which is a very big if, it could, of course, lead to a position where it's very clear that the United States has in effect violated the terms of the Iran agreement. And then the question is then what happens? Does Europe just continue to move forward? Does Iran stick with the deal? In which case, the U.S. becomes very marginalized. It becomes isolated. It loses access to the intelligence that it's getting now when the IAEA goes in and inspects, and it puts the U.S. really on the back foot. So it is a negotiating strategy, but remember, the risks are tremendously high, right? If Iran were actually to restart its nuclear program, withdraw from the deal, this is a tremendously new and dangerous world that we'd be living in, not one that anybody wants to see going forward.
Look, could Iran accept a tougher deal?
Iran has made it very clear that it has absolutely no intention of renegotiating this deal to include the sorts of things that the president has talked about, including measures on the ballistic missiles program or Iran's activities in the region. And remember that if Iran was going to accept a tougher deal, that deal would have been agreed. Secretary Kerry worked very hard, as did President Obama. There were all sorts of alternatives considered. This was the best possible alternative. This was what was gettable. It's not as if the peoples involved in these negotiations were naive to the broader issues. But this is the deal that they were able to achieve, and for what it is, it's a very good deal. And again, it goes back to the first question, right? It's a question of alternatives, and it's clearly the best possible alternative. And people have been sticking with the deal. Iran's sticking with the deal.
This is the deal that was gettable. All right, Leslie Vinjamuri, thank you very much. We've got 60 days to see what happens. 60 days for Congress to make up its mind, find out whether it wants to impose new sanctions or get tougher on Iran, or whether there's an alternative path. Leslie, thank you.
Thank you.